slides you see are of projects he won't have time to talk about tonight. And just to say a few words, I met Craig in Los Angeles when I was working for Arup still, and he was working for Barton Myers, and we collaborated on a large project, also with theatre projects, which was in Cerritos, the place where two planes bumped into each other, a theatre that could accommodate all sorts of different functions. And 10 years later, Snohetta won another competition for an opera house. So hopefully we will collaborate again. Craig's quite unusual. He was born in Frankfurt. He sounds like a Texan. His mother is English. His father is from New Mexico. And he spent most of his life, apparently, in Europe and speaks quite a bit of German and Chinese. But he's offered to speak to us in English tonight. I won't say much more because he's got an awful lot to say. So thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you for braving the mass transportation problem to come here. I left Oslo and it was -20, and I thought that was a sort of difficult thing to travel through, but I guess -20 is perhaps easier to move through than a transportation strike, but thank you for coming. I'd like to present my work today in a different format than the purely representational method of images of buildings and projects. Therefore, I have divided the talk into 3 sections: a way of thinking, a way of working, and after a short break, I will conclude with the work itself. Rather than focusing upon individual representations of various buildings, I would like to focus upon some fundamental descriptions of various buildings. I would like to try to understand or try to make descriptions of architecture from the point of view of the maker, the observer, and the user. The first 2 sections together should last about 20 minutes, and the last section a little more than an hour. The pictures you see streaming past you on the screen are random images of some of the nearly 600 projects we've carried out during the last 11 years. I'll not be presenting these projects today, but I've thought that it would be interesting to provide a glimpse into some of these thoughts, at least just for the thrill of it. Great. The science of anthropogenesis, or the science of the origins of humankind, has a particular bearing upon why and how we have become creators. About 40,000 years ago, there were only about 200,000 widely spaced people living on Earth. This is roughly the population of a few square miles of central London spread across the entire surface of the world. Nomadic groups within this population were characterized by their intuitive hunting skills. As carnivores, our species developed in an unbroken lineage of hunters for nearly 3 million years. At the end of the Neolithic period, some 30,000 years ago, new groups in different climate zones independently developed gathering and farming techniques. These new domestic groups worked within a sense of method based upon the repetitive nature of the seasons and the cycles of the sun to secure successful harvests. The evolutionary sequence of these people formed specific traits within the 2 differing peoples. In the past 30,000 years, as a result of political engagements, changing global climates, and probably tube strikes, these 2 differing societies began to merge. I believe that we are the inheritors of this mix of mental capacity. We are the unsuspecting progeny of a lingering dissonance between intuition and the desire for order. Our religions and our manner of creating cities display this legacy. Contemporary societies freely mix the mysterious and the necessary. In moments of religious need, we suspend reason for the sake of faith. Reality becomes intuitive. When our living patterns become compressed as in cities. We adopt modes of behavior that objectify order. In this way, city planners have attempted to organize living patterns into the familiar rows of crops and vegetables that were so familiar in the fields that the cities have now replaced. Although the human species grew from two understandings of nature, the feral and the domestic, our understanding of nature today is less complex. It is commonly accepted that somehow nature is a good thing, yet it is less acceptable when nature sets its own terms in defiance of human need. One of Oscar Wilde's characters once said, "Let us go outside, lie in the grass, enjoy nature, and smoke a cigarette." This is how nature is defined, in our own terms. The ubiquitous term landscape refers rather narrowly to the manicured vegetation or clearly defined hard surfaces. Landscape does not refer to the cracks in the curbs and parking lots. I prefer to define landscape as inclusive of all things within our scope of physical experience. In fact, I would suggest that we as human beings are landscape, and thus our creations are aspects of landscape upon, within, or above this earth. With this in mind, I have begun to reassess my notion of context. The idea of context that so often accompanies architectural discussion too readily stops at the nearest scale of neighborhoods, regions, and so on. These scales represent readily definable objects that are useful. However, it is also necessary to extend notions of context to scales beyond what is normally considered definable, to what cannot easily be seen, but to what we are an undeniable part of. This thought first came to me when, as a child, I saw an image of a galaxy. Like Galileo, I felt unchained from my world of comprehension. Our planet, at the scale of a galaxy related to both time and space, is not an object at all in the Euclidean sense. Nevertheless, this galaxy, this spiraling form, still persists in being an object. As I later discovered, galaxies are not the end product of context. At a medium scale, somewhere between, let's say, Earth size and galaxy size, the form of the galaxy cannot be recognized as object at all. Our sun, which is the little yellow dot in this picture, rests within a relatively empty portion of one of the spiraling arms of our Milky Way galaxy called the Orion Arm. This map shows our immediate surroundings in an area of space some 100,000 light years across. The gray areas are gas clouds. Our sun is moving in relation to the galactic center and spinning along within the movement of this arm. In some 60,000 years, our solar system will collide with one of these relatively dense gas clouds. Galactic meteorologists have no clear idea what this means. This is another view of the same image that we saw just past, but it's the underside, looking from below up. Our sun is the yellow dot in the center. At the next scale outward, objects become visible again. As many of you may know, galaxies are bound together in clusters of galaxies, unified by a kind of gravitational force. This image shows one such cluster of galaxies. It's not our own. Our Milky Way rests within the Virgo cluster of galaxies, a cluster similar to that which you see in this image. And we have some 60 neighboring galaxies near us, spinning around in our own little blob of star balls. In the past 30 years, astronomers, here in England in fact, have described an even greater context than has been previously known. This image is of a vast network of galaxy clusters, each containing multitudes of moving objects crossing millions of light years of space. This is the largest single structure ever seen by humankind. Each of these white dots is a mapped cluster similar to that which we saw in the previous image. Just for fun, we would be in the center of this particular map. If you look closely, you can see a little red dot. That's probably this podium lamp. That's us. What is liberating about this image is that it is not idealized. It is, in fact, where we live. Whether this volume is retreating, expanding, or simply constant is still unclear. However, these important issues can manifest themselves in the very nature of the works we create. This is a three-dimensional view of the same network of galaxy clusters that was just shown. The nature of this map includes both space and time, as well as our own current position. This is a drawing of a strange meteorological computer that was conceived in 1957. In order to clearly understand the complexity of weather patterns, it was necessary to dispense with acceptable notions of what the Earth is. In this model, the Earth is turned inside out. Instead of standing on the outside of the ball, we stand at the center of a bubble. Looking outward, we are able to see all events on the surface of the sphere. We do not simply inhabit a place on the object, we become an element of the object. It is difficult to discuss geometry at this level without also interpreting time. Time tends to be the silent partner in architectural design, relegated to such things as roof warranties or historical orders. I prefer to think that the things that we create, despite their apparent stillness, are at their very essence a description of time. The sun is often thought of as a golden disk in the sky, as can be seen in this postcard view of a sunset. However, if our manner of comprehension could be extended, the sun would not be a simple object at all. As the day passed, we would experience the sun in different positions and therefore have different relationships with it throughout the day. This is an image of the sun in Norway, north of the Arctic Circle, where in fact the sun doesn't set for nearly 6 months of the year. But as we imagine the sun more deeply, as it moved throughout the day, it would become a glowing arc across the sky. If our minds were able to open long enough to experience this, we would see that as time passed, this arc would shift with the seasons, and the sun, rather than being this simple disk, would become an elaborate and beautiful geometry all around us. From an intellectual standpoint, the ethereal, the sky, merges with the direct, the sun. The same is true in reverse. This image is of a wave on the Atlantic Ocean. In fact, this picture was taken by my father in 1953 while he and my mother were sailing to America. It's a big wave on their voyage to the U.S. Later I discovered a picture of a mountain on the horizon. In fact, this is an image of the mountain called Snohetta. If comprehension is momentarily suspended, the wave resembles the more stationary mountain. The fluid becomes static, despite its lack of obvious structure. Researchers have currently proposed that there is a distinct physical mechanism allowing us to experience time in the particular manner in the brain. Within the brain, there is a loop of linked nerve cells, similar to what is known as the Papez loop, if you're into anatomy, having a constant and harmonious current of electricity pulsing through these nerve cells. The brain records the frequency that electrical pulses take to complete this loop within our structure of nerve cells, and this creates our phenomenological understanding of time. Each pass of the pulse through this loop allows us to sense time. It is helpful in comprehending this device when seeing its effect during our lifetime. As a small child, a year can seem like a decade. Time passes slowly, despite our clear awareness of our surroundings, often in the same manner as an adult. For an adult, however, a decade flies by in what seems to be a span of 1 or 2 years. The structure of the nerve cells within this loop develops as we age, and our relationship to this involuntary mechanism becomes more acute. Without denying emotional states, it has been said that everything we experience is the product of our own nervous system. These, by the way, are both pictures of my wife taken 20 years apart, and are a fine example of the same person experiencing a shift in time. Every time I see these two pictures, I can just imagine a different sort of understanding of the world around them. But it's the same person very similar. The last point I would like to raise in regard to a way of thinking is less related to physical context, as instead bound by sociological context. Whereas geometry is a determining factor in terms of creation, society is the ultimate envelope for our actions. One contemporary issue relates to migration and travel. This is an interesting statistic to consider. For every second of the day throughout the year, there are about 1.5 million people in the sky traveling by airplane. This means that if the world were to come to an end today, there would be a city about the size of, I don't know, Manchester looking for a place to land. This is 3 times greater than the population of the world was 60,000 years ago. I should mention here that there are also about 1 million architects in the world today, and since most of them, like me, spend their time flying, it's an interesting thought that life after doomsday would be populated by these traveling black-clothed designers. In any case, we live in a time where migration is greater than all of the migrations of the past combined. Ideas cross boundaries continuously. This ongoing merging of societies is not important with regards to the dialogue between protectionism and liberalization. Instead, it is with the increasing fact that reliance upon lazy interpretations of the needs of civilization is no longer acceptable. Another such issue relates to environmental impact and technology. Consider this. It takes approximately 19 tons of raw material, such as rubber, metals, and so on, to make a single automobile. For every car manufactured, 19 tons of earth need to be amalgamated to create it. This tonnage goes into, for example, the rubber to make the tires or the iron to make the steel and so on. This seems considerable. However, it is more interesting to note that it takes 25 tons of raw material to create a single personal computer. Tons of water and sand are used to make the chips, and great quantities of raw materials such as copper and gold are needed to make the circuitry. For every car that you own, you require 19 tons of earth to make it. But for every computer that you own, and many people like myself now own more than one, you will need 25 tons of resources to make it. In this sense, it is less environmentally sensitive to own a computer than a car. The list goes on. I believe that it is necessary to more broadly describe the actual impact of our belief systems in the things we create. Ultimately, form and process must consider the most remote contextual spectrum. And as I press the button on my 25-ton laptop, this completes the first section of the introduction, and we can now discuss a way of working before I talk about the work. Another 5 minutes or so. If you ask someone to describe what an architect is or does, the answer is usually the same. Architects are creative people. They like red wine and sketching on napkins, or they carry around rolls of now extinct blueprints on the way to talk to a builder. For those more experienced, the answer is somewhat cynical. The architect is someone who stays up all night drawing and falls asleep at their desk due to exhaustion. Architects can't meet deadlines because they don't know how to organize their time, and they can't even draft details correctly. Both of these descriptions contain some truth. Architects today are seen as the creators of drawings and specifications rather than the creators of buildings. A great deal of effort is expended drafting technical documents that more closely resemble legal descriptions than information about architectural integrity. Why is it that the architect's tender drawings have enormous amounts of information concerning things such as sheet metal gauges or things that architects know very little about? On the other hand, there's nothing on a tender drawing to describe the architectural intentions behind why something is arranged in a certain way, or something architects actually know about. Architectural practice continues to suffer from a lack of understanding for the skills of its partners. Architectural debate must recognize the process of realizing buildings with greater interest rather than solely describing the ephemeral qualities into the state of creativity, however necessary these may be. This diagram shows the typical current building process using contemporary guidelines manufactured since World War II by special interest and professional groups. The architect's office is organized by a pyramid structure where the owner in the uppermost position creates the larger ideas forming the architecture, shown here as a blue dot. Below the designer are several trusted associates who ensure that the initial sketches are delineated clearly. So these are the people that have been with the boss architect for 15 or 20 years, and they know how to interpret the red wine napkin sketches to make them into a real building. Under these trusted associates are the great body of young architects fresh out of school who must actually draft the drawings to make the project. These are usually the least experienced persons in the office. Nevertheless, they are responsible for the physical labor of illuminating the architectural idea for the bid set. In this case, the one who actually had the original idea is furthest from the documentation used to make it. The client then often appoints a project manager who oversees the planning of the work. This also works within a pyramid where behind the project manager are the employers, and behind them are the people who actually use the building. In a school, for example, the appointed project manager is seen as a red dot in this picture and sits outermost in the figure. This is in front of the school board, and behind them, for example, would be the teachers and the students who actually use the building. This means that those that actually use the building are once again furthest from the design data that's used to build it. The bid documents are then given to a general contractor, shown as a green dot. The general contractor uses discretion to separate and distribute the bid documents to various suppliers who send out the information to those on the factory floor who actually make the components that in which the building is actually made from. What's interesting here is that in some way, and it's important to realize that a general contractor is not a builder. The general contractor only deals with contracts. They never pick up a hammer or a saw. And they're simply using discretion to sort of divide up the drawing. So as you can see here, it's a very wildly difficult process. If an airplane were built this way, it would never leave the ground. I'm certain of that. This is an incredibly archaic process, and it's clear that the technology that exists within the system is much further ahead than the system itself. In contrast to this, I'm working to create an environment that is significantly more transparent and direct. Rather than spending time creating separate technical drawings to portray the building, I'm attempting to develop a system where a project network site, for example, is used to create a central file. I don't have time today to go into this, but essentially it's based on it's using entity-based programming in which words actually make drawings. I found that my partner is in China on this project, there are only about 8,000 words used to describe a building. As architects, we only use roughly 8,000 words for every project that we make. And those 8,000 words can actually become fuel in a program to draw lines. And that's essentially what we're trying to do. I won't go into it in a lot of detail, but we're reversing the pyramids, removing the boss architect, removing the project manager, removing the general contractor, and trying to develop a different schedule for time. This is generally the way we schedule projects today, in a kind of stair-step phase process where each part of the work is split into elements that are drawn on this kind of, I don't know, sort of computer program that make a schedule for how to do the work. Rather than using that stair-step schedule, we're trying to overlap different methods of working, try to find a way in which architects can get paid for the work that they do while they're doing it, as opposed to someone's idea of what they think architects do and when they should get paid. And in a way, we're developing a schedule which, in this sense, this is a kind of an interesting diagram. We call this a time plan. People call schedules a plan of time. But the reality is this is a section. It's a section through time. If it's a section through time, what would it look like if you look straight down on it from above to see it in plan, this normal kind of lotus chart? And since architects really only do two things, they're creative and they create measurable effort, drawings and so forth, parts of the work should be distinguishable from other parts of the work. Right now, people believe that somehow architects are going to be creative for, say, the first 2 months. So you have a sketch project and a scheme design, and architects are creative up until that point. And then you're told, you can't be creative anymore. It's the tender drawing space. No more creativity. We're only paying you for drawings. And in a way, that's a fallacy. So we're trying to develop, in a way, the schedule. Here is looking straight down on this. These circles are the creative stages. below is a histogram showing the actual measurable effort that's being completed. It works a bit like a sand clock. There are two ways of distinguishing time. One is like a wristwatch. On a wristwatch, you can't have, say, 15 minutes past 3 o'clock in the day before 14 minutes past 3 has passed. So you can't go to 3:15 by skipping 3:14. That's how we generally schedule time. In contrast to that, this schedule and this way of working is working more like an hourglass. When you turn over an hourglass, all the sand falls through a hole. The idea with an hourglass is that you don't care what grain of sand falls through the hole in what order. You just care that all the grains of sand fall through in a given amount of time. And essentially, that's the way of scheduling that should be probably more manageable in an architectural process. I'll just skip through this. And what I'd like to do, if we could turn the lights on for a minute, just a 5-minute break. I have to put on another program, and I'll show the actual work. So if you can stretch and just for a minute, then I'll 5 minutes, let's say. That seem fair? At the same time, well, it's a risk, and hopefully the work will live up to some of the ideas in the introduction. I'll conclude with a few of the buildings and projects of Snohetta. Our office is primarily known for cultural and public buildings, and the work I will show you today centers on that theme. Since we are also landscape architects, we're about 40% landscape architects. Rather 30% landscape architects. We're also 40% foreign and 60% Norwegian in our office. And I think we have 6 different sexual preferences, so it's a rather diverse office. I will briefly touch upon some of the purely landscape projects, in any case, that we've completed. I will show projects from several countries, and I will conclude with the soon-to-be-completed Library of Alexandria in Egypt and, of course, the new opera in Oslo. Probably the most unique and long-term project that we have is, in fact, our practice. The office is unusually named after a mountain, which you just saw in the last frame in central Norway. It's not the highest mountain in Norway. It's the second highest. Snohetta is the home of the mythical Valhalla, which many of you may know. It's a very unusual idea to name a practice after a place. But it has to do a bit with how we function. We try not to have ownership of projects. We try to distribute the ownership of the projects across the board to all of those in the practice. We are also in a very unusual situation. And oops, sorry, I have to go back. There you go. Oh well, who knows what happened here? The technology is... Yeah. I should mention that we share an office space with a separate graphic design company, and both of us use these kind of roving meeting rooms that we've designed inside of a large hall. The building we occupy is an old printing press that was built in 1937, and the general environment is one of continuous development and testing. We have a relatively flat structure and nearly always work in teams. While there are leaders of projects, there is in fact no clear ownership by individuals to the designs. Even the youngest persons in the office are quite heavily involved in making crucial decisions for all the projects. We are in many ways a collective, meaning that often projects appear to be very different from one another, usually responding to the specifics of each design's needs and issues rather than simply mitigating the issues through whatever dogma we may feel is important at the time. I'll make some ad hoc comments now about the projects. Some of them I will show in more detail, and others I'll simply glide through without describing in very careful detail. The first project I will show is the Norwegian Embassy in Berlin, which we completed in 1999. It's part of a master plan which was designed, as you may know, by Berger and Parkkinen, an Austrian-Finnish architect that won the competition for the master plan. We were not involved in the master plan. We simply designed the Norwegian portion of the complex, which is here. It was a very unusual site in that it was very highly visible from most of the master plan area, most of the area as you walk past it in the city. So it was crucial that we find some way to develop an issue that dealt with the urban idea of the scheme. One of the most unusual aspects of this project is the south facade of the building, which is here. This building is 15 meters high, 5 meters wide, and about 70 centimeters thick, and it's composed of one single piece of stone, quarried in Norway and shipped by boat to Germany and dropped into place. The stone, you can see, starts to be a fundamental anchor to the project. Because there was very little money to spend on the design, it became an issue as to how can we create an embassy that does what it's supposed to do, which is actually a very difficult question. When you're making an embassy in a foreign country, are you taking a piece of your home country to that place, or are you trying to work within the confines of the architectural methods in the place where you're going? We decided to literally take a piece of Norway to Berlin. So we literally carved this one piece of stone. Here is the actual quarry. It was an interesting discussion. When we proposed this stone, it weighs 120 tons. And of course, it was immediately criticized. The project manager, who had never had quite heard of such a proposal, said, "Absolutely not. This will cost too much money and it's going to break on the way to Berlin. This is just ridiculous, stupid architects." And so we said, you know, who at this table, of all the suits that were there, who at this table is a specialist in stone? Can please raise your hand. Who really knows about stone? Well, nobody did really know about stone, because the only people that do are the ones at the quarry. So we proposed getting everyone in a bus. We put all the project managers on the bus, drove them down to the quarry, met the quarry mason himself, and said, "Can you please cut us a 15-meter high, 120-ton piece of stone?" He said, "Absolutely, no problem. Twice as big is easy, and in fact, it won't cost any money at all. It's a very easy thing to do." So everyone was shocked, and we started about the process. It turns out that it was very, I'm afraid the screen is cut a little bit here. I'll go to the next picture. It turns out that making this stone was cheaper than a planar glass wall of the same size, because there's no labor. Essentially, the stone was carved out of the landscape in 2 days by 6 persons. It was lifted up out of the ground and transported to Berlin with almost no fuss at all. The transportation was rather interesting because the project manager was very concerned that the stone would break. He said to the quarry mason, "You're going to have to test this." So he made a specification about this big on testing the stone for cracking. The stonemason looked at it and said, "It's going to be more expensive for me to do the testing than it would be to send the stone. If it breaks, I'll give you another one free of charge." And it didn't break because they knew it wouldn't break. That's their job. That's what they know. So we had to break down all the basic understandings of how a project should be managed. Everything was set aside, and we all had a very open and open relationship with one another. The stone was cut out using a diamond bandsaw. And what's beautiful about the stone is that because it was taken directly from the landscape, this place was covered with glaciers 40,000 years ago. So it's scratched by the glaciers. So the finish on it is really 40,000 years old. On the backside where the diamond saw cut this thing out, it's smooth like a baby's bottom. So it has an amazing intensity to the character of both sides of the stone. It was simply lifted out of place. Brought over across the quarry with a crane. Oh, that's exciting. Go away. Hey, oh, that is exciting. Well, it looks like I have this is a kind of longer, sorry, I have to fix something here. I put in a few more slides than I had in the last show, so it's starting to affect me. Okay. The stone was turned on its side, dropped into place. And what's fascinating about the stone is that because it's so heavy, it weighs 120 tons, it has no fixed foundations. It's simply holding itself up. These stainless steel bar and these two stainless steel rods are slotted into the bottom of it. It's not screwed in or using any other method of fixing. And there's the stone in place. It's literally a piece of the landscape turned upright. Unfortunately, the German safety authorities did not believe, and this was the only failure in the project. Everything else we managed to get through, but we couldn't convince the German safety authorities that this stone would be able to carry the weight of the concrete, so they forced us to put in these columns after the project was nearly complete. We had to do it. There was no way to get around it, but I'm afraid it was very unfortunate. So what we'd done, we worked together with the engineer to make it such that you can actually saw these columns off. So they can be removed at some point in the future. In addition, the building has a very careful control of light into the office spaces. There's a simple glass screen which directs light into the rooms, which are fairly small, to try and make a comfortable, very tight space comfortable for those that work in it. There's a small garden to the rear of the building. The glass was originally intended to be wood, but the safety authorities wouldn't allow it because of fire reasons. So we changed to glass. But it was reasonably successful, this screen. It has different effect of, it moves with the light in different ways as you pass through the building. This is the back side of the stone in the lobby. That nasty column. The ambassador's residence, or rather the ambassador's office. And the column outside, I think this is beautiful, sort of holding up the sky, this column. Unfortunately, when the ambassador shows someone into his office, they have to negotiate this column each time. The next project I'll show is a fishing museum in Karmøy in Norway. Karmøy is a very remote part of western Norway. It's an area which traditionally had as its main economic base fishing and fishing industry. But as years have passed, other industries have replaced the fishing industry, and the people that live there are feeling a little bit nostalgic. So they wanted to make a museum to house the artifacts of the fishing trade that has been there for nearly 1,000 years and is now disappearing. They approached us and wanted to create a kind of a small house similar to what's found in the region, and their initial idea was this house could be a representation of the way things used to be. Our argument was that if they only looked towards the past, their museum would inherently be pessimistic, because it assumes that the future could never be somehow as interesting or as good as the past. So with that in mind, we tried to work within a different ideology, an ideology that somehow respected the past, but also made a clear break from what existed in this area in the past, and looked primarily towards what might happen in the future. It was a very poor community. They had very little money. In that sense, they could not afford a contemporary piece of architecture. Many architects today find issue with details and materiality that cost considerable amounts, which precludes many small communities actually having a piece of contemporary architecture. In this case, we decided to work within a fairly simple idea. We would not produce drawings for this project. We made the simplest set of sketches and gave it to them and allowed them to build it as they saw fit. We had very little site visits. We had very few complaints about things when they went wrong. So we simply allowed them to build it. And I think without that kind of flexibility, without the ability to say, we know this won't be perfect, it won't look good necessarily in all the magazines when it's finished, but at least they have the building, and they're quite proud of it. And it has attracted a number of people from many countries to a very remote place, far west in Norway. The building is more or less placed as a simple box perched onto the fjord. almost like a fishing tackle box. When you go fishing, you just put your tackle box next to you. You don't really concern yourself with how it sits. It just kind of sits there in the most practical way. It was constructed with long and very difficult winter seasons. What's unusual about the building is that, similar to the Berlin project, we did develop some ideas that would take the project one step further. In this case, these are very early pictures, but what we convinced the builder to do was to put fertilizer onto the concrete as it was setting, so that this lichen here, which grows on the rocks in the region, will start to grow up the building. So it was very difficult, of course. You couldn't put fertilizer into the concrete mix because it would compromise it, so he refused to do that. But he would put fertilizer on the outside, so there was a period of time where they were painting fertilizer on the concrete. It didn't work very well, so what we ended up using was yogurt. So it was quite amazing to get the builder to go out there and paint yogurt onto the building. But nevertheless, there was it has started to grow. The lichen, in fact, this stuff here, has started to move up the building. In 15 or 20 years, the building will become a completely different beast. We'll start to have more of this character here. The building is raised up off the ground such that the horizon line in the distance tends to meet. It's right at the level of your eye, so that there's often a link between the raising of the building and the landscape in the distance. It changes in different seasons. When it rains, it becomes this black, extremely black structure. It's on a rainy day. In the late summer, it glows in a way, sort of golden. Really, it's relaxed about how it sits up there. It peers over the rocks down to the sea. It's a very small building, and it had almost no budget, almost zero budget. It was unbelievably cheap. It's about 600 square meters. On the building is another unusual character, this wall, which is made of juniper branches. Juniper tree, or the bush juniper, grows in this area of Norway. And this was an old building technique, about 500 years old, which we kind of resurrected. So essentially we asked the builder to go out and collect juniper branches and weave them through a wooden frame. And the builder refused to do that. They refused to go out and clip the juniper vines. So what happened was that the people who were actually building the building, which are pensioners, the owners of this building are an institute of owned by about 12, or managed by 12 people, the youngest of which is 70. So most of them are between 70 and 90. And they said, well, we'll go out and clip the juniper. So they went out and they spent 600 of their own hours of their own time actually weaving this wall. It's difficult to see. This is the frame, and this is what it looks like on the back. I'm sorry I don't have a better picture. What's interesting about this technique is you don't kill the juniper tree. You only clip off a few branches, and then you go to the next and clip off a few more. Here it is before it's dried. So there's the little scaffolding with the juniper vines, and they sort of wove it up through there. The reason for making that wall like this was because the building was concrete. It gets very difficult to extend in the future. We knew we needed to have one wall that could be easily taken down. If you made it concrete, they'd have to bring out the jackhammers. It would be impossible, especially for these 12, 70-year-old people, to knock down a wall. So this wall is very lightweight. It keeps the air, the climate out, and they can easily remove it and build onto the building in the future. It changes. It only needs to be replaced once every 70 or 80 years. Normally, when this technique is used, they trim the juniper so that it's flush. But we ask that it be left in its natural state. It's for very cheap detailing with plywood and sheet metal. It reacts to the stones on each side of the house in a different manner. And there are two windows which look out on each side of the building. And here you can see they've built a kind of stone boat outside. We placed an epoxy finish onto the floor of the room such that it would reflect the colors in the space. As you approach the window, which looks out over the fjord past the two windows that we saw in the earlier pictures, it takes on a brown color, which is the color of the plywood and the sheet metal, or rather, sorry, the metal sheet metal gauge, I can't remember, I just say it in English, the corrugated metal roof. And as you move towards the window, it starts to reflect the colors of the sky. And I'm afraid this picture is cut off by the screen resolution, but what you can see happening here is even though you're 20 meters above the sea, it feels as though the water comes to your feet. It's a simple ramp leading up to the only other level in the building. We have done another competition some years ago. We've done 3 open international anonymous competitions, and in the 3 we've won 2 first place and 1 second. This was the second prize. In this competition we were the only non-Japanese company to win a prize, so it felt a bit like winning first. First and 3rd through 9th went to Japanese companies, but we were quite happy with the result. In any case, the idea that we worked with was to create a space which was as flexible as possible and one in which the roof became one of the main organizing elements for the visitor. They used the roof to find their way through the building. We wanted to make as great a span as possible, a span which could allow for functions to be flexible below the roof structure itself, so we didn't want to have any columns, or at least as few columns as possible. We developed a system where the beam itself was kind of twisted to use the torque inherent in the twist to provide a stronger basic beam solution. So what we have here, just to give you an idea, is, and I'm going to embarrass myself probably in front of Jane, the structural engineer here, but if you take a piece of paper and you just hold it out in front of you, it's very weak. It's not very strong at all. But if you take the same piece of paper and simply twist it once, it stands up. It becomes stronger simply by virtue of the fact that you've twisted it. So that is what we've done here, and we were able to create 75-meter spans in this beam just by twisting it. The beams were steel and they were coated in glass, and they were used as the lighting, the light source for the building. These are the administration areas. The beams are supported very heavily here, and then they twist from horizontal to vertical here, and this is the main reading room space. This project was done together with another architect, Thomas McQuillan, and we often do collaborations with projects. It's the same building at night. This is a competition which we are almost to have won. I would like to say we won, but we haven't. We're in the last stage of winning this, and we've been told that we won, but I'm not supposed to mention that. It's not been formally announced. It's a project for a library in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. It's about 90,000 square meter digital library on the coast of the Persian Gulf. The building is rather simple. It's a parking area and a plaza, and the building itself is a large glass plane which shades a series of library functions below. There's a large number of cars that are involved in the project, and it's near a number of hotels. The roof is a solar collecting roof, and it is about, I think in this dimension, it's 250 meters across. It's used to provide energy for the library itself, and there's a series of of windmills, which also provide energy to the building. So it is almost entirely self-sustaining in terms of energy. It has a character of a sand dune or a tent somehow in the desert. From the distance, it should have an impression which is very strong in this very flat landscape. This is from the presentation made to the client, so we have some Arabic in our presentation. The roof is using part of the idea that we discussed earlier, this map of our universe. The roof has a film, which is the blue areas, that collect the solar energy. The white areas are holes through that film. And as the sun passes throughout the day, these holes will cast light onto the floor and into the building and move as the sun passes over the building. The entrance itself is simply a piece of this glass lifted. Part of the roof dives down into the sea, and another part connects the building to the landscape. Underneath that roof is something of a more intimate scale, a village, which is easy to move through and not overpowering because the building is so large. So it's covered simply to provide shade. One thing that's interesting about this roof, the roof will be constructed first before the functions below, so that the construction workers will be in shade during most of the construction process. It's only about 4 stories high, so it's very small in some respects. It will be the world's largest digital library. There's a central media center where you go into the building, and Bertelsmann is working with the program of this. You may know of them. They're a publishing company. They're creating a sort of digital map of the building so that when you go into the building, a hologram will sort of guide you through the functions before you actually use it. There's a performance area, some cafe areas, and amazingly, the Sheikh Zayed, has his own apartment, VIP apartment in the library. It's split by gardens, and it's easy in a way to move through from the parking lot across the plaza and into the different functions. Get through this very quickly. The blocks themselves, the individual pieces of the library, are glass boxes, and the glass are made of electrosensitive glass such that when you run current through them, they can turn opaque. So you can make the boxes transparent or opaque depending on what is needed for that time. So you have a very wide range of possibilities as to what these boxes become. Even the roofs are glass, so that they become each time you use the building, it should have a different way of being planned. We were fascinated in a way by this idea that computer circuitry seems to somehow relate to Islamic design. This is actually an Islamic, or rather Arabic text. We capitalized on those issues to lay out the digital material inside the building. Sorry, that went rather fast. This is a section through the building, and the way it works is that there are holes through this large roof, and cool air coming off the Persian Gulf is sucked into the space. As it's heated, it rises and escapes through the holes. Hot air coming off the Gulf is reflected off the surface, and as the cool air moves upwards, it brings with it hotter air from in between these smaller buildings. And there's gardens that are planted to the rear of the building that diffuse the sand as the sand blows from the deserts. This ball is clad in stainless steel, and 60 centimeters away is a glass surface. So the two surfaces will reflect, making it kind of pearlescent. Pearl diving is a very important part of the region, so they were very interested in trying to show that. This is the building in the distance, seen from the Hilton Hotel across the street. The sun will set somehow behind it. building kind of twinkles at night. I'll show briefly a few projects very quickly. This is a project we're doing in Sandvika in Norway. It's a small theater of which Theater Projects, who's here tonight, are working with us on. It's an unusual project in that there's a street that runs through the city and through this town, and they want to close it off and put a theater in the middle of the street, which is rather unusual. They will stop the car traffic from passing through. The problem is, of course, that there's a tunnel under this, which means that there are almost no place to put foundation systems. So we really only have one small area to place the foundation system, such that the building will have to cantilever from that. So we're creating almost a mushroom in which all the foundations come down into one place, and the theater itself cantilevers out from that main bearing system to allow people to move through and under and around this building in a very tight site. There's a structural system, a beam, that passes across the lobby, and the lobby itself can be used as a rehearsal room, and so at night you may be able to see people rehearsing in the building as you pass from one part of the town to the next. This is a very old project, an art museum in Lillehammer. It was built for the Winter Olympics. It was I think, on the cover of Architectural Review some years ago. It was a project to be a kind of cultural icon for the Winter Olympics. It's always difficult to do projects during the Olympics because there's quite a lot of aggression, and everybody wants to do the best for their country. So there's a lot of pressure to make something which is somehow significant. We tried to avoid those kinds of issues and take a step back and look at why this building could become important. This is one of the paintings in the Art Museum collection. It's a painting, in fact, of this mountain over here. And there's a very strong landscape painting history to the region. We started to work with the idea of these forms from this distant landscape to try and bring them down into the city itself. We also were interested in the technology that was developed in the area of wood carving. These are some trades and artisans that are working with wood that goes back maybe 1,000 years or more to the Viking times. So we tried to work within that idea. We wanted to get a boat builder to actually make this facade, and we found one. In fact, this is one of the boats that the builder made, or was in the process of making. And the project manager wouldn't allow us to have a boat builder on site because they weren't building builders, and you couldn't have boat builders. So there was a big argument that ensued, and they said that it would cost more anyway. The boat builder wanted an extra 1 million Norwegian crowns. And they said that settles it, we won't pay for it. So they did the job themselves, and they end up wasting about 40% of their wood trying to get the curves right because they didn't understand it. So it ended up costing twice as much as what the original boat builder would have charged. So in a way, there wasn't the ability or the openness to accept the kind of development as a team with artisans outside the normal framework of building. It's a large surface. What's beautiful is that in the summer the wood is vertical, but if you look closely you can see the screws that hold the wood in. They're horizontal, so in the winter the snow sticks to the screws, so it becomes a horizontal facade in the winter. Behind the wood is lifted up. The wood is lifted up off the surface of the plaza, and there's a lobby. And this is the first show. It's a 12-meter cantilever aluminum sculpture. It was an amazing thing. Just jutted straight out from the wall by Bob Breivik. The changing gallery, this is actually a 90-degree angle, but because of the light, it's almost impossible to see this corner. It always disappears. It's a beautiful thing. You almost can go right up to put your nose there and you still can't sense that it's a corner. The wall of the gallery is tilted at 8 degrees. This is the normal tilt that paintings require to avoid glare. So that meant that they could be mounted flat on these walls. the director worked with us on this aspect of the project. It ended up being somewhat successful. Behind the galleries are a garden, and the backside of the building then is a different material. It's metal, as if it were sheared, ripped apart from the wood. There's a sculpture garden that we designed as part of the landscape architects in the office. And the garden is, I'm sorry, this is the only picture in reverse, so this is mirrored. But there's a stone sort of water source that leads water down into the rest of the garden. This is a very beautiful situation where we planted this tree and the stone together. And the whole is just the size that the tree will be when it reaches maturity. So the tree, after about 15 years, will probably just kiss this hole. It was very difficult to plant that. They had to get the stone and the tree and put them in together. They're there for life. There's an unusual situation in the back. The fence that surrounds the building, these very large stones, these were quarried by Albert Speer during World War II in Sweden. And when the Germans lost the war, they were left in Sweden. They were meant to be used in Berlin, and nobody wanted to do anything with them. Everyone was afraid to touch them. So we managed to acquire these stones for almost free. And we built the stone wall that surrounds this garden out of those ancient stones meant for Germany. As the stones move down this sculpture garden, the water ends in an area near the entrance, and the sound of the water is always apparent. In the winter it freezes. There's a rather unusual stair here. If you can notice, there's no handrail here. We had difficulty with this. We felt that a handrail wasn't necessary because you actually have nowhere to fall onto, and there's a handrail on the other side, although it's not finished at the time of this photograph. We took it to the building authorities, and they said, absolutely, you have to have a handrail on the stair. And we said, well, we don't think it needs one. And they said, you absolutely have to have one. And this went on for 2 or 3 weeks. And after a while, we took the drawings back, and we erased the word stair off the drawing and called it sculpture. And they said, well, if it's art, it doesn't need a handrail. So we never built the handrail there. And it just, in a way, it shows you the different relationship that we have with art as opposed to architecture. This is another piece of stone that we developed in the bus stop. This is the bus stop leading up to the museum, which is just between that gap. We did this project, which is a headquarters building for Telenor in Oslo. It's a very large project, and we worked together with Richard Rogers Partnership. So it was another collaboration or project. In a way, these stones, which you see here, which are just off the coast here, that picture is taken about right here, became an idea which led to partly to the formation of the project. There was a very intuitive character to this notion that somehow at the micro scale the landscape could be taken up to relate to a very large building of some 1.5 million square meters. The building is a simple beam, which was at some point considered to be a plywood beam that was also twisted, similar to the Kansai project, to give a very large span for free workspace. So this is an office, old office facilities, and between each one of these waves was a garden. In the distance, the project was placed in the old national airport. The airport has since moved in Oslo to another place, and the airport is open for development. And in the distance are these mountains, which is a little sketch here, which also became an issue that seemed to relate somehow to these forms. So there was a close development of the methodic nature of trying to plan a campus and create the best lighting and working conditions, and the relationship to the landscape. These are the beams themselves, which are twisted. When they twist, they open to the north to allow north light into the scheme. We won second prize for this project. It's National Library in Riyadh. The roof is a piece of textile. This is canvas, which hangs down, and a spring steel arch. And the two forces, one pulling down, wanting to pull the walls in, and the other one pushing out, wanting the walls to spread out, the two negate each other, which gave us the possibility to make a great span with very, very small columns to hold the thing up. Very quick. A bridge. We did this with Mark Whitby, an engineer here in London. This bridge was very unusual. It was a pedestrian bridge in Trondheim. The essential idea here is it's based more or less on something like a fishing pole. If you take a fishing pole and you hold it out in front of you, it just wants to be very wiggly. So as soon as you shake it, the whole fishing pole jiggles like this. But if you take the same fishing pole and wrap the hook back and hook it into the last eyelet and reel the string in, the pole becomes taut and it's stiff. So it becomes inherently strong. So essentially this is the same concept. This is the fishing pole and this is the string that's pulled back. So it's pulling itself across the river. We didn't win this. It won't be built. We do a number of interiors projects. This is a showroom for a lighting company in Oslo. And this is actually the showroom, complete with all the lights in place. The idea was that rather than sort of making a space that was filled with hundreds of different fixtures, we built a cabinet so that all the lighting fixtures are in this cabinet. So when you come into the room, it's rather astonishing. You think you're going to a lighting showroom, and you walk in, and there's not very few fixtures to look at. In a way, it switches your mind, allows you to try and focus more on the different objects for sale, such that when you're ready to see, you pull out these various drawers, and the fixtures are behind them. A very simple scheme. This is a staircase, and these two pictures are not trick of the camera. They're in fact the light conditions that are caused by both a mix of daylight and artificial light at different seasons in the year. Looking up the staircase. We do a number of gardens, and as I mentioned, and this is nearly the end before I'll show the Alexandria Library. We do gardens. We try to plant 60 times more trees than we make buildings. It's an unusual process. We're going around all over Oslo finding places where we can plant something. This is a very rough part of town. It's often considered the side of town where there's the most drugs and alcohol. And this was formerly a parking lot, and we've planted some linden trees in there with some gravel, and started to develop a new way of moving through this space, along with well, it's very calm and pleasant now. There's a need for lighting at night. We had an interesting situation. Because there's a lot of people that are drunk here at night. This is the subway station entrance is here, and there's a number of bars near here, so people are often staggering in. So we made a lighting scheme, and then we tested it. This is how drunk people, in a way, would start to experience the space. We tried to really understand how you would move through this intoxicated or in some other manner. And I mean, in a way, these people were the client. You can't ignore them. And we developed this blue curving soft wall, which kind of gently eased you towards the subway station. This is a sound barrier. We were approached by, once again, it seems to be cut off, this pictures, some of them by the projector. But the highway department wanted to create a sound barrier that would keep people who lived in houses nearby in a calm environment, whereas this very heavily traveled road was rather obnoxious, and in a way it killed the area. This was a very forgotten part of Oslo. Nobody went there. Nobody liked to think about going there. It was a very remote part of the suburbs. And what we've done was we resurrected once again an old building technique using slate, which is just stacked up. There's no mortar here. And this wall is nearly 3 kilometers long. And on the top of the wall we planted marigolds. And this is an unbroken line of marigolds, 3 kilometers long. And if you know marigolds, they blossom at one time of the year and they almost explode with gold. And then they disappear after about 4 or 5 weeks. So now people know this, and now people drive there just to see this 3 kilometer line of marigolds explode in the springtime. So it's completely altered the character of this once forgotten part of the city. We don't do everything big. We've done some small projects. This is a fountain for a cat that we've done. It's in a way important that our projects are seen not just simply as the library in Egypt or these rather large things in the Emirates and so on. There's a very large aspect of the office which works with these very delicate little projects. This was an unusual garden. It was in a backyard that was a pretty rough part of town. And the people that lived in the building didn't have quite a lot of money, and they wanted to try and fix it up. So we started in the beginning with this small fountain for a cat. And what we found was that the garden was really a mess. It wasn't a garden at all. In fact, it was just a building that had fallen down inside of a ring of other buildings. It was rather decrepit. What we tried to do then, which was different than I think most architects would have attempted to do, rather than just cleaning out the building and starting from scratch, we collected all the bricks from that building that had fallen down, and we collected every piece of material that would have been considered trash and tried to make the project without buying anything, trying to use everything that we found in this place. So in fact, the fountain that you saw was made from a pre-existing stone that was carved into that. These are the bricks that were collected from this decrepit shack, and then they were simply laid up on top of each other without mortar, since mortar you have to buy. And they were using some metal sheeting that was sort of stored off in the corner. We did have to buy some more of this to hold the bricks up, though, so there was some purchasing there. These are the stairs that used to be in the building that was back there. We just simply reused them. There they are in the new garden. And it became a very lush and pretty garden. This is the foundation stone from the old building, and we made benches out of the pieces of the concrete that were in the foundation. This is an old hubcap from a Chevrolet that we found pieces of car that were actually under the ground. We excavated the car out of the ground and placed the hubcap into the wall. The bricks that weren't used in the wall were made into paving, so they were set into the ground. And because there were a lot of bricks, we couldn't find uses for all of them, and we didn't necessarily want to throw them away in the landfill. So the bricks that weren't used for floor were crushed, smashed into little bits, and made into gravel that surrounds the grass itself. And it can be very beautiful, especially when it rains. And the money since they didn't spend very much money on the garden, they used the rest to paint up the back side of their alleys, which we didn't do. They did that themselves. And we planted climbers. These will grow up to 20 meters up the side. This is the fountain again, and this is hops to make beer from. And in the spring, it's filled with different plants. It always has a different character, and there's the fountain again. And then just very quickly, I'll show you two more gardens. I won't say much about these. This was an unusual project that started out as simply a place to hide the trash. They said, could you please make us something that will hide our trash cans? And in the end, it became a more unusual project because the site was so tight and so dark. We found that there needed to be some way to bring life into this place. Otherwise, it would just become more and more degenerate. So on the side of one of the walls, we made these mirrors, which are like traffic mirrors. And they reflect the sky and the light down into the space. I guess you could say these buildings are in the equivalent of an area, say, in the East End here in London. And what happens in the space now is that the round reflections of the sky and also the reflections of the glass, some of the light is bounced off of this and onto the glass across the garden. And you get these rather unusual patterns of light in the space. And now I'm afraid I'll conclude with the library in Egypt, but because I had that memory problem, I have to load it. The final projects, two projects I'll show are the library in Egypt and the opera in Oslo. The Alexandria Library has been in our office for 11 years. We've been working on it continuously for 11 years, and it's been a labor of love. It's been a bit of carrying a stone around your neck, because every time you think you've finished it, it's somehow not yet finished. And every time someone asks us when it will be finished and we give them an answer, the date moves a little further forward. The idea for the project was to create a library that somehow revived the ancient library of Alexandria that existed some 2,000 years ago. Nobody knows exactly what happened to the ancient library in Egypt. Most people think Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Harris had something to do with its downfall. But really it's a mystery. Alexandria itself has been written about continuously for some centuries. It is a very unusual city. It's about 75 kilometers long now, and it has 4.5 million people, but it's about 6 kilometers wide. The city itself is surrounding an ancient harbor, which was written about by Homer in the Iliad. And our site is one part of the harbor here. The people of Alexandria are rather intriguing. You can see the faces of Asian and European and African cultures in nearly everyone that you meet. It was at one time the largest city on earth. Alexandria had 1 million people about 1,000 years ago living in it. It separates two very unusual environments, the richness of the Mediterranean and the starkness of the Sahara. And the city sits as this very delicate line between the two. This is a map showing the ancient harbor and the road system surrounding it, which has been moving forward as the harbor has been filled in over time. This is the site of the ancient lighthouse in Alexandria, and our site is here. We were quite moved by the shape of this harbor, and we somehow wanted to extend the character of the project beyond the site limits that were given to us. The building then adapted a kind of circular form that began to mimic the nature of the ancient harbor onto the site, so that as you moved through and along the corniche, you experienced the two as one. We found relationships to that idea to ancient mythology in Egypt and to contemporary technology. This is a data chip. And all these ideas started to merge almost randomly in our heads. The building then has a very clear and distinct form. It's 160 meters in diameter. It's 80,000 square meters and will be about the 9th largest library in the world. It holds about 5 million volumes of books, or it will when it's full. The library has a very large reading room, which takes up about 80 by 160 meters of that space. This is an amazing picture taken by one of my colleagues. They were flying over Alexandria, and the captain said, "If you look out your right window, you can see the library." And he was in the aisle, so he just reached over across two people and snapped, and that was the picture that he got. But you start to get an impression of the form and how it relates to this structure. The building isn't simply an idea and plan. It also has a very unusual section. It's a tilted disc. It pushes itself into the ground and lifts itself above the ground. This is not our building. This is an existing conference center. We made this bridge which connects the University of Alexandria to the Corniche, and a small planetarium sits outside that operates independently. The geometry isn't a tilted cylinder. It's in fact a piece of a torus. So if you take one of these little rings here, this is the geometry of the building. It's somehow a piece of this larger geometry frozen as a moment in time. In section, the land or the ground upon which we stand is rotated such that a portion of the building moves or dips into the past. It crosses the present and raises into the future some notion of geological time that may occur at some other point. That's the section of the building. Each of the reading terraces has a seating area that's on the edge, and then an open access collection, and underneath the next terrace is the closed access books. so that you're always in a comfortable position to read. You're not surrounded by books necessarily. If you need privacy, you can go under the terraces, and there are smaller rooms which are developed for more individual needs. Here are the terraces. There's a balcony which has changed shape today. These are 11 years old, these images, or 10 years old. You can see the entire space before you actually enter. And there's some reading areas that are enclosed at the top. This is the foundations being dug. It had the world's largest circular diaphragm wall in concrete. Very unusual situation to have such heavy construction load at the time of digging the foundations. The foundations cost $67 million. And there are 632 piles. Some are in tension and some are in compression. There were excavations made on the site that found ancient Roman mosaics and drainage systems that were taken away and will be housed either in the building or in a separate museum. Here it gives you an idea of the scale. There's a person there descending into this foundation pit. There's a pedestrian bridge which is made of precast panels, and it will have handrails. These pictures are about 3 months old, and it's quite beautiful. You descend or move across this bridge out into the Mediterranean. The ancient library was quite heavily involved in astronomical studies. In a way, the planetarium began as a representation of some of the images of the Earth as first seen by the astronauts. This dome is, in fact, it's not a dome, it's a complete sphere. It's suspended off of the ground by 2 very large beams. So you can go under or through the plaza and be underneath this ball, and it completes itself up into the sky. There's some very nervous workers. To build the sphere was rather amazing. They had to actually climb on this ball 360 degrees. These are prefabricated concrete units. So they were like James and the Giant Peach. They were climbing on sort of this thing from all directions, putting it together as if it were a planet. Once again, and similar to Abu Dhabi, the sun sets right behind the planetarium at certain times of the day from the plaza, so it makes an artificial eclipse. That's the planetarium in the day. At night, there is one unusual aspect to the building, which is as the disk rotates, it pulls up with it, in a way, a geological description of its site. This is 6,300 square meters of hand-carved stone. The stones are 2 meters high and about 1 meter wide, and they cover some 10,000 years of history. They cover at least every civilization that has had writing, as far as we can tell. And they create a rather beautiful effect on this very rustic, very intuitive wall. There's a very massive feel to it. This is amazing. These two pictures are 5,000 years. These two constructions are 5,000 years apart. It cantilevers the stone off of one edge of the plaza. To give you an indication, a person is about this high. Strangely enough, the characters had to be taken completely out of context. They don't say anything. It's impossible to have them to say anything. Many people have asked us, well, what do they say? If they were to say anything, it would, of course, create an immediate discussion as to what they should be, and somebody would argue with somebody else, and you would never be able to agree on anything. It would just kind of create permanent dissolution of the idea. When I mentioned one time at a lecture that they didn't say anything, somebody complained that we'd spend so much money on something that says absolutely nothing. But in fact, there is a kind of beauty to the pieces. They say something without necessarily having a description. Each stone had to be drawn. They're carved over several stones, so a special technique was made. We had to bring stonemasons to Norway and Norwegian masons to Egypt to build up the skills to be able to make this wall. Without that kind of technology, it would not be possible. In contrast to the wall is a very more or less technological construction, contemporary construction, and that is the roof. The roof itself is designed in modules which are allowing northern indirect light into the main reading space. I know you can maybe see a little person there to give you an indication of the scale. The roof, similar to Kansai, is the main organizing element to the building, so you're able to determine the way of moving through the building before you actually enter it. Ah, it crashed. I guess it's over. We're finished. Really, that's amazing. I've never had this happen before. I'm afraid it crashed. Okay, well, I can either fix it or we can call it quits. Should I fix it? Yeah? Okay. That's impressive. It could only take so much. I think it crashed because that just meant that the tube system is back running. It just sucked all the energy out of it. Thank you, Bill Gates, for that little advertisement. When we won that competition, I think I was 28. My colleagues were 29 and 30, 31. So we were fantastically young. and it was a frightening experience. Of course, it was very exciting at first, but when the dust settled and we looked down the barrel of the shotgun, it was rather intense feeling. I would say that to a certain extent, though, the thing that is unusual about the project is that I think it would have been difficult for even an experienced and large firm, such as a 200 or 300 person company that had been in existence for 10 years or something. So in that sense, I'm not sure that anybody would have had an easier time. It really didn't, it wouldn't have made it any easier. But it was rather astonishing that the Egyptian government gave us the respect to build this thing, which you might not find in Western countries. I don't know if you could imagine in London if a small 25-year-old from Albania won the job to do the Tate or something. I don't know. There would be a tremendous difficulty. So there was a great deal of respect for us. Everything went smoothly with the project. This is one of the units or the modules for the roof. It has a glass kind of baseball cap to take away the last vestiges of direct sunlight throughout the year. A view of the roof. Once again, you can see the persons moving across the roof to give an idea of scale. These arcs were made by running a computer program that passed the sun across the roof. So this is the arc of the sun across the roof at one point during the year when the sun is at its lowest. There's balconies that go into the administration areas. The column capitals are rather impressive. The beams are about 2.5 meters high, and they're ridged like this. They have these little ridges on the capitals which take the little bits of direct light and also the indirect light and filter them down the column capitals onto a small stainless steel band which allows the light to almost flow down these very tall columns. I'll find sorry, let's get through that. That was silly. Well, this is one of the first images that we drew in the competition, and you can almost sense the kind of energy that's being required to push this roof up out of the ground. These are the columns themselves. Some of them are up to 21 meters high, and they're only about 40 centimeters in diameter. They're very, very thin and delicate. So a person is about this tall. At night, there's a very unusual quality of light in the space. And we have made cast glass or resin filters in these panels so that during the day these green and blue lights pass directly down onto the floor of the room. And as the sun moves, these green and blue lights pass across the floor and up the desks and over the lights. If you stay in one place too long, you're almost forced to move because these green and blue lights will chase you around the room. Looking up from about the third basement up towards the top. These are about 2 months old. Has the character of more, I believe, of an Islamic nature than of a Western or Christian one. The acoustics were a difficulty in such a space, so we've made a concrete paneling system with holes in it that are filled with an acoustic surface that create the right temperature for the noise in the room. This is about 25 meters high. These are about 1.5 meters tall. There's around the entire room a skylight, which will also change the character of the space throughout the day. And these are the two exterior pieces, or ideas in a way, merged. I think this is my favorite picture on the right. It's an amazing thing. The building is a huge construction, but the first thing you think of when you're there is this all there is? Is that it? And that's actually kind of a very difficult thing to do, to make a very large building feel almost inconsequential. This is a panorama taken of our office visiting the site. So this is 360 degrees through there. We're just finishing this, and of course it was rather amazing that we won, and this is the last project, the Oslo Opera Competition in June of last year. It was right at a time when we thought that we might only ever be seen as a one-building company. It's difficult, in a way, to overshadow the Alexandria Library. It's a bit like going to the moon. Once you've been there, you're afraid that your rest of your life will be rather temporary. And it was needed, this project, for our practice. It allowed us to focus on something else. Unfortunately, this project won't be finished until 2008. So we have I don't think I'll have any hair left by that time. We told them in a way that it was useful that they choose young architects for these big jobs, because anyone else will be dead by the time they're done. So this is a picture of a theater that was a part of a film. I think it was Brunel or someone called The Accidental Play or something like that. I can't remember the exact story, but essentially there was a theater made for a show which everybody wanted to see, and it was sort of the popular show, so it was advertised all over the town that there was going to be a very important show and you had to see it. So all the cool people had bought tickets at a very high price to go see the show. They were all taken to their seats. They showed up on the night of the show, and they were directed by the ushers to their seats. They sat down, and then the curtain raised, and when the curtain went up, it was another auditorium looking back at them. And there were two audiences facing each other. And of course, they were very perplexed, the two people, sort of staring at each other like that. You know, well, is this the show or not the show? And then they realized that it wasn't the show. And they, of course, got very angry. But by this time, the people who had done this had left the building. So there was no one to complain to. And they started throwing things at the stage. But of course, by throwing it at the stage, paper, it just hit the audience members on the other side. So they were at war with each other. And in a way, it starts to describe the difficulty in understanding what a theater is. We take it for granted that somehow there is a kind of something that happens behind a curtain. But it is a much more complex issue than that. A theater, and especially an opera, is very often politically compromised. Few people go to the opera, so people often say, well, if no one goes, why should we have one? The reality is, to a certain extent, that it is a part of what I believe Italo Calvino has somehow described in Imaginary Cities. The opera is a part of our imaginary life. Even if we don't go there, we like to know that it's there. We like to know that it's out there. And somehow we visit it in our mind. And to a certain extent, increasing culture of any level will bring other levels of culture with it, those that you may ascribe to. So I believe there is some use for such projects, despite the fact that they don't have the importance today that they did 100 years ago. This is the site for the opera. It's half land and half water in an area which is currently the largest traffic intersection in Norway. And the Norwegian government will spend something roughly the gross national budget of Brazil to put this highway in a tunnel and create an entirely new city out of this formerly impossible to use place. This is the character of the area now. And our project is essentially composed of three very simple elements. A stone platform which rises from the sea up over the theater buildings and the stage functions and allows people visiting the opera to ascend to the roof or to walk or descend down into the ocean. Separating the public areas from the stage areas is a sort of curtain that you move through to see a performance. And behind that is virtually a machine for the actors and performers of the building, kind of village or complex, which has balconies and natural light and gardens to give them a very comfortable place to work. When you place the three elements together, it makes a fairly straightforward handshake between what is the machine and what is the public character of the plaza. Seen from above, it's pulled away from the street system. The main emphasis of the project was to avoid what many people did in this competition, which was to create a monument. An architect often has the desire to create something that can be easily seen or is extremely visible. But in this particular situation, by creating something too dominating, it would have cut off the west side or the central part of the city with the east part of the city, which is where the city is growing. So we pushed the building down as low as we possibly could. It's probably the lowest opera house in the world, possibly the only opera house that can't be seen on radar. It's extremely condensed. Here you can see part of the effect of that is that this ramp almost takes you up to the surrounding mountains that join the Oslo fjord. Here it's possible, as I said earlier, to literally take off your shoes and walk into the fjord. There's a link between the main station into the building. The entrance is simply a crevasse between this fracture of this floor surface, this naturally tilted surface. It's amazing, if you just tilt something just a little bit in the urban fabric, it becomes much more domineering. To the general public reaction is that you've somehow introduced the natural landscape into an urban environment. It demands the attention of the visitor to a certain extent, despite the fact that it's not very tall or monumental. In the summer, the building will reflect itself into the sea, and in the winter, the ice that forms here, which is there right now, will break up over the plaza, so very large chunks of ice will be pushed up onto the surface. It's very straightforward planning. There's a plaza, lobbies, some theaters, performance areas, and dressing rooms. And we didn't want to mess with that basic idea. Theaters are very, very complicated buildings, and they have a basic plan. And I'm afraid to say that you can really not venture too far away from those ideas. You have to be able to introduce other intentions without messing with the machine that is the automobile. This is drawings by theater projects who we're working with on this project. There's a 1,300-seat theater and a 450-seat theater. The section, I believe, is rather beautiful. It peels itself up from the ocean bottom, lifts itself up, and then if you could continue this further, it would meet the mountain behind. The lobbies are one continuous space to connect all the theaters together. Inside of the performers' areas, there are small gardens, which we'll introduce to give them very optimum working conditions. They have to be there 24 hours a day. The building, despite the fact that it's oriented towards the city, does start to build up a relationship to the fjord. And the stone on the plaza, it's not white, this was just the model, but we're taking images of glaciers and starting to develop them, almost pixelated, so you'll start to get the movement of ice and ice sheets across these surfaces. They'll take on different characteristics in the summer and the winter. The handrail is integrated into the roof, so it won't be an issue in a way, kind of screwed on thing later. And I'll just show you one more thing and then it's done. That's finished. This got lost in the crash, but here it comes. It's a little movie. There are parts of this very simple animation that I think are quite nice when the light starts to reflect in different ways off the sea and off the building. The stage tower is actually a kind of reflective surface, so it will start to carry some characteristics of the sky. These are the gardens and the backstage functions. This is a part of a new development. It's not our design. Once again, the reflection of the building into the sea. One woman, when we presented this building the first time, she said, I don't like the opera, I don't like going to the opera, but I think this building should be built because you can get up onto the roof, and I know that one day my daughter will have said, I had my first kiss on the roof of the opera. This is running at a very high speed up the roof. In a way, what is interesting is that we have managed to some extent to give the building back to the city without necessarily introducing commercial aspects into the project. Today it's often thought if you want to bring people to a building like this, you have to stuff it with all kinds of shops and stores and make it popular. But you can also bring people into the building simply by making it a place that is intriguing and reactionary and something unusual and out of place. I believe that the project will work on that level and hopefully provide something to the city other than the opera itself. Both should work together. And I think that's it. Thank you for sitting for so long. Yeah. Right? Yeah, sure. Yeah. Wow.
Well, Craig, thank you. I have to say, Craig, that one of the things I most admire is that you're completely unembarrassed about being so completely enthusiastic. And it's really wonderful to see.
Thank you.
There's so many ideas and so much enthusiasm in the work of this practice. I think it was a very, very enjoyable presentation.
Great, thanks.
So thank you very much.
Yeah.
Craig could take a couple of questions. I'm going to limit it to about 5 minutes, but if anybody does have a burning question.
I'm sorry I didn't have time to go into detail and everything, but I felt it was more interesting to at least get out some ideas and basic thoughts, and maybe another time focus on one project.
Well, you may catch it. Craig's going to be in the school tomorrow. We're lucky enough in DIP 13 to have him do an off-the-cuff crit for us, so you may catch him if you want to tomorrow sometime. Okay, thank you very much.
Great,
indeed.
thanks. No, that's fine.
Don't use the term reaction. Reaction means really